that the students come to the lecture. We have today guest people coming from outside the IAAC, and we are more than happy to say hello to Lucy Bullivant. Lucy is a good friend of IAAC. She has been in the last year at least once per year. She is an architectural curator, author, and critic. She was trained as an art historian at Leeds University and has a master's degree in curatorial history of the Royal College of Art. She has curated many exhibitions and she has written at least 8 books. Among one of them Anglophiles, UK Architecture Rising Generation, and many others. I think, Lucy, we are always interested about Lucy because we are having less and less people in Spain that writes books on architecture. The position of critic of architecture is really disappearing in our country. 20 years ago, there were incredible magazines, incredible people writing books, etc. And I think that in the last 10 years, the phenomenon of the critics of architecture somehow is disappearing. I remember Renkula saying, we need critics, we don't need sellers. No? We has been many people that are kind of someone trying to sell architecture, and in order to sell architecture, they write books. No? And I think that Lucy is still one of the few people in the world that has a kind of consistent career of someone looking at the reality and trying to say something, try to organize the reality in order to express and to explain the society, what is happening around the world. No? So the new book she's preparing is about urbanity or master plans, etc. And that's why we are interested to listen what she wants to explain us. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you very much, Vicente. It's always such a true pleasure to be here and contribute to the IAAC program. Yes, I always like to feel in some way that I'm like a spy on architectural culture, an investigative journalist looking at the history of the present in a way, which is quite a challenging thing to achieve. Okay, so my theme tonight is master planning, but not just master planning, but maybe what master planning is evolving into in the future. And it's Masterplanning Futures is the subject of my book, which will be published by Routledge in the spring of next year. Now, master plan is a verb that everybody uses. Economists use, governments use, prime minister, even the Pope probably has a master plan. And perhaps in a way, it's the fact that everyone uses it for everything perhaps diminishes the significance of it within an architectural urban design context. But let's see, this is something I've been researching globally for the last 2 years. Anyway, to have a plan nowadays is taken on a very strong significance in this age of what we call casino capitalism. The economists, before the global crisis, they had this phrase, everyone likes to find a solution, right? And they would say, the tide of globalization, don't worry, it lifts all boats. All the boats can come out of the water with globalization. It can improve everybody's lives. It's almost as if we don't need any other plan. We have globalization, we have the market. Why do we need to care about any other issue? But of course, now, after the crisis has hit, that seems like a very useless way of looking at things, useless metaphor when it comes to how do we deal with solving all the environmental crises that are hitting the world and impacting on cities? Is it enough globalization to deal with migration to cities? No, I don't think it is. So in what is quite a volatile period right now, there are countries, there are some societies which practice more laissez-faire type of planning. In the past, the image was the master planner was this a male figure put his hand down through the clouds like God, and he would play around with a city or urban plan, mainly focused on morphology, and a little bit like SimCity before computers. He would make a perfect determinist blueprint, and then it would be rigid and it would be fixed. Now, all of that is increasingly out of date. So instead now, architects that I've been looking at who have great strategies, really imaginative, subtle, and fit all these words: adaptive, responsive, flexible, incremental, situational. They talk more about enabling enabling tools or mechanisms for making a better future. That's much more appropriate. They also stand a better chance of succeeding if people will feel happy to claim ownership of the concept, and they need to have a say in the process in the first place. Now, that's not a very straightforward idea, but public consultation is becoming more and more and more important. So in my book, I explore the ideals and the processes of contemporary master planning, and I look at the different types of alternative strategies for bringing about radical change. And by the way, radical change is not just the appearance of the city, but it's the functionality, the connectivity, the economic mechanisms, moreover, which are connected into the master plan ethos. Conventional planning, as we generally understand it, it is carried out using criteria of maximum profit, minimal costs, and it takes a simplistic area ratio approach. But in our century of complexity, we need a new title and a new understanding of what we're doing. And so I prefer the phrase adaptive planning, and some architects who are more in favor of an informal approach, such as Urban Think Tank, who I think who've lectured here, they favor the phrase microplanning. But in any case, what's good about it is it uses multiple criteria. It uses emergent intelligence. It's more resilient as a result, because the plan emerges from the interaction of the decision makers and the stakeholders, and it's not imposed on them from higher levels in the hierarchy. It's situational more than it is conditional, and it responds obviously to social, cultural, economic realities, possessing a backbone of shared values and allowing some space for room for maneuver. And room for people to do, what they might want to do without being subject to social determinism. This is not a plan I'm going to talk about, but it's an interesting project by young Turkish architects for reusing car parking structures. Hafen City in Hamburg, master plan by KCAP, who are continuing to do great master plans all over the world. And this one is the first phases are finished. So my book discusses master plans in process by selection of architects. So you've got the big people like Foster, ACOM, who do a lot of work in the Middle East, Case Christianse, OMA, Enrique Norton from TEN, MVRDV, but also a lot of younger architects like Elemental, the Chilean practice, Metrogramma, the Italians, Alejandro Echeverri, Chilean, Westgate, Entasis, who are Danish, and many more people have been interviewed. I have to interview Vicente when I can sit him down for a moment, and will be quoted. As I couldn't be truly comprehensive globally, that would be an enormous job, much bigger than even Rem Koolhaas's SML Excel. What I did was to cluster the plans instead around themes, and they are themes that are connected. So you have, let's say, post-industrial, post-military, post-disaster, lots of retrofitting, extractions of old, useless, abandoned urban structures, the shaping of science, technology, and cultural districts. Obviously, within that, there's a theme of urban growth, and within that, the idea that you have one master planner, but as in this case with Almere, you could potentially have a lot of architects working on different districts. In this case, the plan is to have 30 different architects working on designing the houses. There was a competition. So you have this, let's say, simultaneity of teamwork, all working together. Eco-cities and towns, then very important to also acknowledge the growth of the political power of landscape architecture and landscape infrastructure-driven plans. So plans like Madrid, which probably a lot of you have seen, the Manzanares River Plan, which finally is completely finished now, as of a few weeks ago. Magnificent thing. The whole issue of how you bring about a better social equity within cities through transformation of public space, plans for new urban connectivity, new growth, regional plans, gets bigger and bigger. And as far as possible, I've discussed the extensive public consultation that goes on, which obviously now it uses a lot of charrettes, workshops, blogging, voting, and as a result, you would hope that it's much more likely to tap into collective desires, hopes, and fears. Let's say, to be more aware of what people really think they might want or not want. Make no little plans, which was, of course, the famous slogan by Daniel Burnham when he was working on the master plan for Chicago. And to just give you now a flavor of the book, it's got a lot of detail in it, and each case study is incredibly in-depth, so it would take forever to explain one. So instead, I just picked out 5 stories. One is a story about a plan that was abandoned. Another one is urban development plan, which is actually part of an entire landscape infrastructure plan of quite regional significance. One is approach to urban space, which is about differentiated unity, a very interesting concept, I think. One is a plan to reinvent a crime-ridden city. Another one is new ecological urban centre, and then finally post-disaster plan. None of them is generic, and none of them should be copied and pasted somewhere else in the world. But they all, to my mind, they all show operational tools that are very positive, and the principles underlying them can, in a way, be picked up on and used. The spirit of them can be used in a very mature way in other contexts. They're not just, as Urban Think Tank puts it quite nicely, circuits of resistance to the generic city. That's an Urban Think Tank. I won't talk about them today, but just to pick up on their master plan in Venezuela. They also, the other thing they have in common, the plans that I admire, is they have a dynamic hybridity between the urban and the natural, which is becoming stronger and stronger as a theme, based on performative new rules that bring transformation but also sense of equilibrium. I think it's very timely to open up their processes, because right now the digital has in any case rendered urban plans more transparent as phenomena through website documentation and public blogs, but also through the existence of more mechanisms that offer us manipulable lenses to view and investigate the world. So example, Google Earth, the green map systems that environmentalists use around the world to document green spaces, biking paths, endangered habitats and other things. And the New York Times website embodies this quite hyperlinked dynamism about space and geography, I find very well. And then there's also World Mappers, which allows fed-in data about numerous global economic factors, from population growth to energy use, produce maps showing the disparities between the developed and the developing worlds. And then this one here on the screen, walkingpapers.org by Stamen is a site with free geographic data. It's like a wiki-style open street maps that users can edit and update online to personalize locations. And it's been used for humanitarian relief efforts like in Haiti and in disenfranchised areas with a real lack of on the ground information to help lobby for changes in urban infrastructure. So, okay, so just a quick reminder of a few historic master plans that some worked, some didn't work so well, before I tell you the 5 stories. But so the city of Brasilia was built only 4 years ago, and last year it celebrated its 50th anniversary. But whilst it's in the individual buildings in the city by Oscar Niemeyer are hugely admired, the public spaces have been accused of being rather barren, and maybe it was just really a product of its time, of the thinking of its time. It was maybe more about the iconic master plan, iconic buildings. By contrast, the city of, Chandigarh in the Punjab region in India, it was an integrated vision of Corbusier's, but the councils of the nearby satellite towns, apparently they made very little reference to its concept and its grid system when they've been developing their own satellite towns. So they weren't so madly in love with Chandigarh that they wanted to follow that path. They want to make something that's entirely different. Also, you can think Berlin's Potsdamer Platz was developed to a master plan by Renzo Piano in the 90s. And it's been criticized not just for the blandness of its corporate architecture, but also for its failure to blend in with surrounding older neighborhoods. So you have a disconnect between the two architectural languages and operational pattern. So a master plan in an urban design sense, it's if it works best, it's a holistic mechanism for place. Now, these days, only in a few cases can it be a tabula rasa, so starting from scratch. OMA did a plan for Waterfront City in Dubai, which has now was so hit by toppling share prices and being bailed out by Abu Dhabi that this hasn't gone any further, of course. More likely, a master plan involves retrofitting the industrial city, the zoned industrial city, into something more pliable for contemporary needs. And this is Garibaldi Repubblica in Milan, which is part of the Porta Nuova district plan that reunites 3 adjacent neighborhoods, reuniting them, and at the heart is this large park which will become one of the city's intermodal hubs. So regardless of the nature of the site, the master planners, they have to face the reality of the urban condition, that really traditional categories of space, residential, commercial and industrial, they're breaking down. And 20th century distinctions between the home and the workplace are now being blurred hugely. I mean, to what extent is it meaningful to call an area downtown or a business district? Why can you not actually have both? Why can you not have social intensity? It's almost something you can't argue against. Also, who in fact manages the plan? Are they adequately formed as a team on the client side? There are so many questions that you can ask. So the first story is Milan. One of the most famous master planners in the world doesn't always get his plans built, Norman Foster. His aim was for an integrated sense of intensity for his plan for Santa Giulia in Milan, but it became a victim of the crisis. It was a 1.1 million square meter site, a city within a city, with a natural environment at its center. It was going to have a green lung park, like a green lung, designed by West 8, in the formerly industrial area to the southwest, giving Milan a new gateway on the scale of New York's Battery Park City or Canary Wharf in London. And it was the publicity was that it would be one of the first intervention of its kind in Milan for over 50 years. It was mixed use with housing, offices, shops, restaurants, cafes, cultural facilities, cineplex, with the park, and a lot of green spaces elsewhere. So a balance of nature and urbanity. Foster proposed to turn the 3 derelict industrial areas there into a unified, coherent and organic whole. So it would have very long 480 meter long central promenade, 24 meters wide, typical of the Milan pedestrian shopping streets, new tram lines, water features and so on. I tried very hard to avoid a suburban feel creeping in, but unfortunately the whole thing became hypothetical because Risanamento, the developer, was forced to sell some of the site. And it currently sits half-built without any of its promised green space, uncertain future. They're trying to obviously sell to other buyers. There are no schools, few services, no markets, no luxury shops, no Congress Centre. City Council decided to put the Congress Centre somewhere else, so you can imagine that as a magnet for activity that's diluted that particular plan. So in 2007, the developer was selling the flats there at 8,000 to 9,000 euros per square meter. Then the price plummeted down to 2,000 to 2,500 euros square meter. God knows how cheap they are now, because probably no one really wants to live there. So that's the sad story. But obviously, architects, however starry they are, they can't prevent the outcome, so hopefully something positive will result. But the thing is, with the bigger picture of Milan, there is an incredible, very ambitious plan. And I interviewed Carlo Mazzaroli, the deputy mayor, about their new urban design plan. The urban design plan. It was PGT, Piano Governmento Territorio, for 2030. It's about as much about new economic and social levers as it is about urban quality, and it's multidisciplinary. They have the Italian equivalent of Goldman Sachs devising new rules, mechanisms for land use, so that the municipality is very poor, and the idea is that in the end, after some years, they end up having more equity than they have done in the past. Now, a big part of the plan, and in fact is the Raggi Verdi, the green rays, part of it, devised by the Italian-German landscape architects Land. And that, in fact, predated the plan. It was a passion of Land to make this new concept for Milan, an environmental strategy linking the green belt of the city to each of the city's urban districts, with a system of green areas connected by a network of cycle pedestrian paths, like rays from the centre. The overall plan itself is based, and this is Metrogramma leading it, it's based on an intense mapping of the city, which has led to them conceiving of 88 new neighbourhoods, completely, they're not conjured out of thin air, but they're based on reality, on real existing social neighbourhoods. But basically, conceiving of Milan as a networked lattice array instead of the traditional image functionality of the city as hub and spoke. So it's really changing not just image but functionality, because before there were 9 administrative zones which have been built up over centuries, but basically after doing the research the team concluded that they weren't very meaningful, they didn't really reflect local identities the way they had actually evolved. And obviously it will take them some time to implement, but I think this perception is very important. So a lot of cities in Europe, obviously they want to go to carve out a function post-industrial, past the industrial era from a lot of districts. And the commitment to a master plan can really help to, as the industry withdraws, then the footprints of the commercial expansion remain and they can't be totally erased. And at the same time, the residential sprawl enabled by private mobility is also left a lot of voids in urban centres. And this is the case whether the city is densifying due to the vitality of its activities or shrinking. I mean, for Andreas Kipper, the partner in Land, this is the case. In either case, the challenge is to take advantage of the situation and start designing urban development from the city's voids. So Raggi Verdi is a 72-metre-long network of foot and cycle paths leading through the eight green rays of the centre of Milan, and they end in the suburbs. And Kippai says he takes his cue from the American architect Charles Waldheim and his definition of landscape urbanism, in which landscape replaces architecture as the basic building block of contemporary urbanism. Urbanism is seen as inseparable from living systems, and they're not considered as a mere recreational relief or just a visual amenity, but they're seen as embedded, integrated part of the city. But Waldheim makes a distinction between evolving urban landscapes in which opportunities for change over time are given a lot special place, and the big vision of a master plan. But by contrast, what Raggi Verdi does is it has got a bigger vision. It's one that the municipality has made very important within its structural plan, so allowing the voids to become open-hearted spaces in the city. So the first of the green rays crosses the Porta Nuova district to the northeast of the Duomo, and then there's a lot of disused land left after the changes in the railway system. And 3 neighbourhoods, Garibaldi, Varicini and Isola, will be improved and reconnected together, and there'll be a big park, pedestrian precinct and so on. What Kipper says, he says, in the past, unlike in the past, in today's cities, green urban spaces, they're no longer set apart in a specific section of town, but they're places for daily interaction which acquire value only if they become an integral living part of the city itself. They have to escape from the strict boundaries of a spatially defined plan, and they have to become part of the overall urban habitat, becoming part of more of a concept of a fluid and welcoming city. So the mix of green spaces and historic fragments drawn into more or less cohesive whole, it contrasts very strongly with a modernist utopia of tabula rasa, and it applies a reformist approach which starts with what is there and changes and proposes changes from within, which is obviously more challenging. And at the same time, we know there is increasing number of propositions for off-grid developments, even proposals for permaculture, community schemes, shifting the further emphasis towards self-sufficiency. Okay, so to just talk about Spain next. Zaha Hadid's scheme for Thoroughfare in Bilbao, 60-hectare scheme. It's cradled in if any of you've been there, in a long curve of the Nervion River, just across the city centre, responding to existing topography. And the practice's conceptual aim is to bring a sense of differentiated unity to an urban fabric and setting for social life. The former port and industrial area will accommodate nearly 15,000 new residents, provide workshops, labs, studios and offices for 6,000 more workers. Now, why is differentiated unity a useful approach here? It's because it has virtually been separated from its neighbouring communities by a canal open to enlarge the port, which will in future be extended to assist flood control, and this will make Zorathari an island in a strategic position. But moreover, it's got the dramatic character of its surrounding topography and the curve of the river. It influences, it's quite a strongly defined urban grid. And the idea is to create a finely textured ground sweeping the length of the site. So the idea is to have 3 loosely defined districts that will be well connected with neighbouring areas via numerous bridges, giving life to the river. So the architects, they lay out their system of building blocks like tiles, each one over 1,000 square meters, allowing the ground to respond to the curving spine of the river, to the street grid, and to the shifting orientation of buildings from upstream to downstream. So the buildings are turned perpendicular to the long axis of the river, which opens up the building fabric so that pathways and views can be enjoyed. And the tiles themselves have a platform structure which defends against floods and also creates space for underground parking and allows the waterside promenade to dip closer to the normal level of the river. So Zaha and her team, they describe the organizing structure of this. One that allows for a densely built environment to go hand in hand with a strong feel of a porosity heightened by the presence of waterside promenades, parks, tree-lined central avenue, small squares and public gardens. Now, as I said earlier, I'm also looking at plans which try to improve the lot of all citizens, strengthening social conditions and quality of life. This has been especially marked in Latin American cities, in metropolises in recent years, not just in work, to retrofit work on the favelas and barrios, but across the whole metropolis itself. I mean, for a mega city like São Paulo, the Brazilian planner Jorge Wilhelm, he stated, the rehabilitation of the urban environment, it goes hand in hand with strengthening the social and political power of citizens who lack it. This is really the only way he wants to work as a master planner. So it's very much based on a certain value system. Now, in Colombia, I think you had Alejandro Echeverri speaking here not so long ago. So I'm going to obviously cover a little bit of that territory, but this is my personal take on the master plan for Medellin in Colombia, the other city of Colombia besides Bogota. Sergio Fajardo, the former mayor of Medellin, he was driven by the idea that of the most beautiful for the most humble. And he has created a huge impact with his idea that anything you give to the poor is a plus. So as part of the master plan led by Echeverri, a program of 10 new library parks for the city, symbolizing a new cultural era, have been implemented, including the Park Biblioteca España, designed by Giancarlo Mazzanti on a hilltop in a barrio formerly one of the most hit by murders and drug dealing. It was completed in 2007 at a cost of over $4 million. At the end of the 20th century, this barrio was considered one of the most dangerous in the whole of Latin America, and according to national statistics, in 1991, the number of homicides in Medellin overall was 381 for every 100,000 inhabitants. But by 2005, that number had dropped to just 34. Because what's significant is for many decades, the city had been regarded as somewhat completely dominated by drug trafficking. And in fact, in the 1950s, a master plan by architects Paul Lester Vina and Jose Luis Set was actually thrown out or just abandoned because the city it has such financial and political instability. But in 1997, a new law, 388, it required all Colombian city councils to draft public space renovation plans and implement them within 3 years, which was very ambitious. So the Plan de Ordenamiento, the POT, was very influential. Bogota, which is a city with more than 7 million people, this is still Medellin, of course. Bogota has decades of unplanned growth, and it itself realized a successful urban renovation plan which transformed it. And Medellin, by contrast, has had half this population and is only 147 square miles, so, or what's that in meters? So smaller. So transformation, according to Fajardo, he saw that it could emerge from new projects over a period of time, in fact 9 years, and include a modern urban rail system, the only Colombian city to have achieved to build a new rail system like that. And new schools, community centres and housing have also been built. The metro, which was built in 1995, connects to the elevated metro cable added in 2004, and it enables access to one of the city's most impoverished and also previously inaccessible hill-based communities. So when Fajardo was mayor between 2004 and 2007, he got together a lot of professionals and academics who defined the basis for the transformation of the city and the whole Abura Valley region. He was advised to bring international consultants in to just improve the image, perhaps in the old-style master planning way, bring in the star architects. But he rejected this branding exercise and decided to stay with the locals. In 2006, the Area Metropolitana, the leading regional administrative body, it sanctioned some new directives for territorial planning, and these give new guidelines to develop natural features, public-private buildings. So there was a succession of legislation that actually helped to pave the way for the master the directives have also helped to open up these previously very rigid, class-ridden boundaries that prevented spaces being democratized. With these objectives, the consortium has helped to initiate policies and projects. So there's a new waterfronts and plazas as well as the new schools and libraries and so on. So the urban renewal has also been carried out in neighborhoods, including some of the poorest, and the people living there were consulted about the plans. At the same time, the City Council gave funds to social programs for education and gave loans to small businesses. There were proyectos urbanos integrales to get rid of the social exclusion and to bring in social housing programs. And then the fourth one recovered the central importance of the street. Teaching citizens, it sounds a bit didactic, but teaching citizens to be confident about walking in a city dominated by cars, a city where, in fact, in many districts, people were actually told not to go out after 5 p.m. if they wanted to stay safe. So creating emblematic streets and walkways, new linear systems, connecting what is a linear system. So the founding street of Medellin, from north-south downtown, was based on the idea that everyone could meet there. So lots of new buildings improved, new Explorer Park, the Urquid Diorama building, which probably some of you have seen the images of this, and opening up all the landscapes to the public street as well, and adding new facilities, cafes and so on. So today the slums are in the middle of the mountains, and Echeverry has explained that the tale of Medellin is a story of two cities, the formal consolidated city along the river and the informal city along the hillside. And his goal was to connect the two. And he calls his approach social urbanism through the means of architecture and urban projects. So bringing the best design quality to improve relationships with the surroundings and include footbridges and so on. He said before also there was a frontier between the north part of the city where the poor areas start and the metro in the downtown. So the interventions related physical and programmatic actions to construct a new network localized in the territories. And each project had a team leader in charge of creating new different communication channels. And so also it was operating through an institute owned by the municipality with a very strong level of technical support. Fajardo has said recently, the political leadership for us is the key to the change in the city, and he continues to work in this way elsewhere in Colombia. Moreover, Medellin's master plan, it doesn't just end here with the pretty pictures. Echeverry and some of his team members have started an urban research center at the university, and they're now trying to combine environmental, social and cultural issues with urbanism, thinking how to improve some of the politics as well. So it's an interesting thing that you can, having gone through this whole process as a result of some enlightened political legislation, that you can use in a way the lessons from a design process to somehow further enhance or improve political legislation. So it's almost like there's no end to the improvements that you can make. I mean, it's quite a brave architect who come up with new political legislation. But I'm sure, in fact, a lot of architects would do if they were given the mandate by the mayors or the governments to do that. And also this whole ethos of better buildings in poor areas has spread to other Colombian cities, such as Villanueva and in Bogota as well, being influenced by it. So as early as his childhood, Fajardo, he said he was clear about the significance of aesthetics as a tool for social transformation, as a message of inclusion. He said, underlying it all, the most important word in all these urban interventions in which architecture plays an important role is dignity. So he said, many people have a solid wall in front of them. At one end is a door to enter into the world of illegality, drug dealing, for example. Another door leads to informality and homelessness. So our challenge has been to open the doors in that sealed wall, doors so people can pass through them and go on participating in the construction of hope. So, coming back to Spain again for this whole issue of the ecologically advanced district, and one other example, of course, in Spain is Vicente's Sociopolis, Valencia, and so on. But one other project in northern Spain, in extension for Logroño, is Monte Cavo Eco-City, which MVRDV proposed to extend the area of La Rioja for 130,000 inhabitants. The autonomous community government of the Rioja province gave the green light. I think the money is still in question. But it was designed by MVRDV with a Spanish practice, GRAS, G-R-A-S, and it will be a new neighborhood and extension, as I said, to the north part, with a CO2 neutral footprint achieved by producing renewable energy on the 56-hectare site. The plan itself is for only 10% of the site, which is linear, compact urban development, and it meanders through the landscape with 3,000 social housing units, apartments that all face the city, sports facilities, retail, restaurants, infrastructure, public-private gardens. Making use of the differences in height, each apartment has a great view of the city itself, while the lower roofs are accessible and offer possibility to create public space. The rest of the site will become an eco-park, mixing park and energy production, and obviously, topographically, the site has a massive asset because there are two small hills, in fact. So it's offering beautiful views, and the slopes are south-facing, so it can easily generate solar energy. And you can see there's this tapestry of PV cells on the hills, like thousands of gold spots, like and there are windmills. There's a funicular to a museum and a viewing point housing a research center for renewable energy. I think 3,000 new homes, obviously they don't make a whole city, but the project shows very well how technology can blend into the landscape rather than to overpower it. So finally then, what do you do when you've been hit by an earthquake and a tsunami? Well, this is not Japan, and obviously the gravity of what has happened in Japan is considerably greater than what happened in Constitución in Chile over a year ago, which they've had subsequent aftershocks as well, another earthquake this year. Constitución, this is elemental, the Chilean practice, and Constitución is the second city in Chile. It's 350 kilometers south of Santiago. It's a seaside resort near the mouth of the River Mal in the Pacific Ocean, and it was hit by a massive 8.8 magnitude earthquake and subsequent tsunami last February. So at least 550 people were killed, and over 2 million people, 80% of the city, were left homeless. The plan is of massive value in understanding how seismically vulnerable areas can be reinvented, also with the full consultation of the communities. So most of the collapsed buildings, so about 70% of the building stock of the city, including a lot of historic structures, they weren't new, but they were made of adobe or sun-dried mud. And the Chilean president said last year that reconstruction from the earthquake would take 3 to 4 years. And that's obviously they're still trying to work out how they would fund it. So they set up a public-private alliance to develop a master plan and a consortium of institutions and consultants, so Elemental and who have broad experience in the development of social housing, as you've probably seen in magazines. And they favour the description of a do tank rather than a think tank. And the idea from the first, working with Arabs as well, was that this would be with the participation of the community. So they set up a number of meetings. The Sustainable Reconstruction Plan got approved on the 30th of June, but it had to be produced in just 100 days. So obviously, there were things happening simultaneously, people being given emergency housing, but in the first 100 days, the entire master plan for the reconstruction, not just to give people a short-term emergency solution, but to create something that was actually profoundly shift the city and help it protect it from these things happening again, make the thing a whole lot more robust. So they had to go out and research and assimilate a lot of information. So on one hand, they had to have design ideas with the public backing, but they also had to design mechanisms to implement them. And they had to look at the two together. So obviously it's kind of step by step, checking each one, going back, checking again, adjusting each state. There was no time to really plan first and then consult the people and then think about how to implement it, but they had to do everything at once. And I think this simultaneity, challenging as it can be, is really the way that master plans have to go in the future. So the idea was not to reconstruct, to recover what was there only before the earthquake, tidal wave, but to make a whole new city under a comprehensive point of view so that people could enjoy a better quality of life. So there are 4 areas. There's infrastructure, public areas and their resources, housing and energy. And here you can see the main public spaces and plans for a new cultural centre and new cultural centre, fire station, school, river park, tourist boardwalk and cycle paths, bus station, theatre, facilities encouraging more tourism, children's playgrounds and so on. They wanted to rebuild all the public buildings destroyed, and I think one really important thing that the master plan does is to make the town's DNA anti-tsunami as far as you can, is to provide a whole new coastal park that shifts its access to the waterfront. Because a lot of the people who work in the city are fishermen, so it's not practical to say, okay, well, you can't live anymore by the waterfront, near the waterfront, because it's dangerous there. You have to go and live somewhere much further away. You have to accept the reality of the locality of their livelihood. There has to be some way. So Alejandro Aravena and his team at Elemental, they said, okay, we have a park by the waterside with a forest, not a concrete wall. Because looking at the inefficiency of concrete barriers in Japan and Hawaii, it's what it calls a geographic response. So this is already in the forest zone of Chile. So it's a geographic response to a geographic threat. The city itself, the urban fabric, this is the waterfront, the fabric of the city building stock wasn't of great value, and most of the resources were nearly wiped out. So they made a new urban aesthetic with, there is an image here somewhere of, here we go, a new urban aesthetic, not to be completely adhered to everywhere in the same way, but to, let's see, to implement, let's say, buildings with galleries with rows of columns for each building, which they'd not previously had that kind of aesthetic. And it refers to the Chilean tradition of the row house, to be mainly constructed in concrete with wooden walls. So also the housing in the park, lightweight buildings on solid first floors built along the park's borders, made of wood, protected by the green space. So people need, as I said, they need to live close to the coastline. So the team developed a public consultation plan. They had their own centre, the open house, which was a whole inductive process, confronting citizens with real projects instead of creating abstract diagnosis of the situation and maybe intimidating them in the process about all the huge detail of the stuff that they were going to do, and all they had to do was just tick and say yes, which is a bit threatening. Because they didn't have time to analyse the situation, but they had to use a lot of professional intuition to propose and test things in these fora, with community, people, politicians, technicians, services staff all present. And the idea was to have very transparent participation, multi-channel, multi-scale, and making it binding through a voting process. So in the end, 94% of the citizens voted in favour of the plan, and over 4,000 visited the open house exhibition, over 6,000 visited, and more than 11,000 visited the website, and then nearly 1,500 people wrote down opinions and sent them to the mailbox and so on. And they had 50 weekly citizens forums, lots of meetings, endless. And the Ministerial Regional Secretary for Housing and Urban Development, she liked this whole process because it revealed the progress of projects, and it also revealed the clear doubts that people had that existed, so that they could realize exactly what they were and then take them on board, so that people didn't feel they were being, they already had a tsunami. They didn't want to feel they were being overtaken by like a wave of, we're going to do it this way kind of thinking. Some people, officials, they were concerned about recovering all the mud houses, the adobe houses destroyed. But during the consultation process, it emerged that people didn't actually really identify with them. They weren't so obsessed with the idea of keeping them. What they wanted to do was keep some references to nature. It was the Mall River that defined their identity rather than the mud houses. So somehow a design that embraced the river was much more favoured. So the housing minister confirmed that this public-private alliance model was very successful and can be applied to other affected locations in the country, with the contribution of other private companies. So there's a lot of big wood industry in Chile, and so there were Arauco, the big wood not fabricators, wood company distributors were involved from the very first go in the whole scheme. Elemental, they learned to think about the emergency and the contingency plan as incremental actions that were fast and improvable, because there's no urban reconstruction process in the world that lasts shorter than 3 years. So with a contingency plan, what they're doing is creating permanent and professional solutions that are coordinated, integrated, and feasible. Aravena said that the most precious resource is coordination. And that's a design skill, is coordination, obviously. It's not about being asked just to do a design, but to come up with the deeper questions as well that need to be solved. So it's almost the quality of the questions that you're asking as you go through the process, which is really a very critical part of the master plan. Okay, so 16 years ago, so those are the stories, and I could tell you a lot more stories, but I think to now just conclude with a few little highlights. When Rem Koolhaas wrote the book SML Excel 16 years ago, 1995, he identified a paradox that urbanism as a profession disappeared just at the moment when urbanization everywhere was on its way to global triumph. And he talked about a new urbanism involving the creation of enabling fields that accommodate processes that refuse to be crystallized into definitive form. Now, when Rem writes, there's always an underlying irony. He's always being a bit humorous with you, although he says a lot of people don't realize that. Expanding notions, denying boundaries, not separating them and identifying entities, but about discovering unnameable hybrids. So denying boundaries is obviously a very big theme in a lot of those plans that I've discussed, and expanding notions and so on. But unnameable hybrids is still a bit of a mysterious kind of concept. But my book tries to be constructive about planning in an age of uncertainty, and also a time in society where we have a lot of new hybrids and social patterns emerging all the time. And journalists particularly like to give them names all the time, new trends, new vogues, new activities and so on. So without being rigidly deterministic, how can urban adaptive planning be carried out powerfully so it contributes to the futures of cities and regions, not by enforcing new morphologies, making new ghettos, making new orthodoxies that people in fact cannot live with, because they're just layers of intrusive elements, but by more subtly influencing shifts in programs and patterns towards new hybrids. So I would much rather have unnameable hybrids, and if I were an architect, work at studying what they could be and how I could contribute to that in a good way, than, let's say, what Jane Jacobs called in the past planning, all the planning lunacies, that actually a lot of these master plans are working quite hard to get rid of. You know, there's a lot of retrofitting, a lot of refitting, post-industrial zoning of cities and so on. So a lot of getting rid of the things that we no longer find usable. So in the last 16 years, since Rem wrote his book, the way in which cities have evolved has definitely given substance to hybrids that even Rem couldn't define back then. I mean, and he said, you know, really what he's saying, don't try and control everything, because obviously it's about honouring the organic evolution of cities. You have to honour the reality that cities are going to evolve organically anyway, whether or not architects are involved. But the equilibrium between that and the influence of architecture, which I like to think that architecture, the generation now that's active, is very, very benign, because we are now very much more socially and culturally oriented in the way that we operate. So I know you have elections coming up here soon, and we have our own mayor who came in and said he hated tall buildings. So if the previous mayor, Ken Livingstone, he would never have them. And now, of course, we have the Shard, which will be the tallest building by, Renzo Piano happening. So mayors change their minds about their own urban plans. So Boris Johnson, our mayor, he recently said the city was the single most brilliant invention of our species. He recommends that at all times you have to keep putting the village back into the city. I mean, we can speculate. What does he mean about putting the village back? Does it mean, what identities are you talking about? Governed by what policy instruments? What kind of equilibrium? And is it all about play, or is it about having the natural back into the city? Maybe he needs to speak to more architects to discover what he means. Anyway, what I hope he means is that the principle and the impulse to microplan I hope he means that, to encourage a more intimate human scale and create a place for hybrids. So the place for the personal rather than the simplified abstract. So in the face of all these unknowable factors, master plans, they need to be very deeply researched to get a grip on the strengths. The typical SWOT analysis. You can do a SWOT analysis of everything. You look at the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats of an urban territory. Why? To see what possibility there is to go beyond genericism, to go beyond repetition, go beyond living with things that we no longer need, that still exist in the city, to what extent we can manipulate them and change them. And the scope for hybrids, which basically is, I think, allowing freedom for things that we haven't yet given real name to. Just give freedom for things to emerge as part of the master planning process. So that's everything I was going to say, but just a few quotations here. Thank you very much.
Sorry. So there is any question? In fact, I would like to ask you something. Now, when you were talking, I mean, right now we are discussing about the future of Barcelona. I mean, the crisis are great moments in order to see what will be next. What I was thinking, in fact, is that the concept of master plan was a tool used mostly from private developers in order to set up a vision about what they want to do in the territory. Those developers, in general, in fact, they will be developing this master plan without money. They will go to the bank, they will be asking the money, and then sometimes they will use architects in order, sometimes use the branding of the architects in order to raise more money, etc., etc. So now, because Barcelona invented the word urbanism, and urbanism was not about this. It was more like a public initiative. It was more the state that has a vision about the territory, was creating some rules, and then developers were more working on the scale of the buildings than not in the scale of the design of the city. In fact, so my question is, what do you think which is the connection between, on one hand, the crisis and the master planning, and on the other hand, ecology, in fact, is used in some of those cases as another way of, another side of the marketing. I mean, they do ecology because it can sell more, or even it can requalify some land that they used to be agriculture in order to become urban, but because it's ecological. And the real ecologists that are not sometimes architects anymore, they are people that are connected with the urban ecology. In Barcelona, we have the Urban Agency of Ecology, that they are the best master planners, but they are not architects at all. So I would like to know, what do you think about other people coming from the biology? Yesterday we had a lecture from that is talking about from cradle to cradle. They are biologists. The biologists are those that are doing the best, let's say, visions about how living systems we could develop. So how also this is going to affect the idea of the projects and how architects we are going to participate on these.
Well, you've got two questions there, haven't you? And the first one is about how the developers can shape up in their ideas and be more integrated within a local government system. And I would say maybe in London, by comparison with Barcelona, we've experienced this thing, the phenomenon of the growth of the entire new piece of new city, like Canary Wharf. And in fact, a couple of the developers went bust making Canary Wharf because they tried to do everything at once. And so if the funding doesn't work, like with Santa Julia, then you have to pull the plug. And I interviewed the developers of King's Cross Central, which is the piece of former railway land where the Eurostar terminal is in central London. And I said, how are you making this work without going bust? You don't want to copy the Canary Wharf model. And they said, we're really going to be very incremental about this, and also we will go in stages, and the plots will be leased to individual companies and so on. I said, well, then doesn't that dilute the quality of the master plan if everyone is carving up the land and everyone has a little parcel? But I think the master plan there is sufficiently strong to withstand this. But they're working closely with the local council, and yeah, I think probably in London that they were so scared they would repeat the Canary Wharf model again that I mean, surely the developers now, they're having such trouble to get the backing from the bank that their ambitions are being pushed back in any case. So isn't that possibly an opportunity to look at it another way? I mean, Hafen City in Hamburg was very much public-private alliance. I mean, the problem with a lot of European governments is they're cutting back their own budgets, aren't they? And if the developers can't get the funding, then there are going to be fewer master plans happening in any case. But I honestly think that partnerships across the board, different sectors of stakeholders, it's very challenging to keep the transparency in all the meetings and keep everyone involved, but it's the best way, because it's the best potentially. But it also needs strong political leadership. It does help to have a champion, a mayor who's really behind it. I think with the other question, though, is I'm really in favour of landscape architects with a strong political sensibility. The ones like field operations who have a great interest in longer term plans. They take account of biodiversity. How can if we accept there's some great quality and worth to the Gaia theory, and I think cities are organic ecosystems, but there is a big difference between seeing that as a nice metaphor, a nice way of seeing the city. Big difference between that and actually having biologists do the job of architects. So how do you think the biologists have managed to take the place of architects? Have the architects let them come in, or?
In fact, the landscape urbanism is the way the Americans are approaching maybe the organization in a territory that in fact is really very big here, like in America, etc. But this is not what I'm talking about. There is what is after landscape urbanism is in fact the urban ecology. And the urban ecology, I was in a meeting 2 days ago where the people say, this is a system that we have things that are objects, but also we have living beings like the humans, etc. So the question is, in fact, that if we understand the city as a system, for example, right now in Barcelona they are talking about mobility, how to do a better organization of the bus system. So it's not about, architects, we used to know things that now are not enough in order to plan cities, because cities are really becoming much more complex. Cities are related with many other informational questions. For example, now energy. What architects, we know about energy. We don't know nearly anything. You know? So, and then, no, it's true. We don't know, I don't know what is a kilowatt. No, I know what is a kilogram, but I don't know what is a kilowatt. No? So what I mean is that, architects, we have a great sensibility. But we have, so what I mean is, with your presentation, I'm thinking, in fact, this idea that the form is not everything that we need, and the idea that we are able to design a plan is not enough in order to plan the way we live. And then all the interesting people that we are having here at the IAAC are not about planning, is not architects anymore, are people like urban ecologists, biologists, and other people that are really analyzing the city in the way that maybe Cerdà was studying the city, that was an engineer, and he was doing statistics about sociology in order to plan the city.
What about the model in Milan, though? With you have Metrogramma, you have then that links into what Stefano Boeri is doing with multiplicities. His proposals, he's made a number, and now he's curator of the Milan Expo 2015, which is ecologically advanced, and it's about urban agriculture and so on. Maybe that model is more interesting. I must say, though, we in the UK we don't really have. Under the Labour government, we had this plan for a series of eco-towns, and it became embarrassing because people were, in the end, a lot of people arguing about whether they should be on greenfield sites or brownfield sites, and it became a discussion about, we like the idea in principle, but we don't want it as an extension to our city. It's almost like they didn't like the idea of, if you had a Monte Cavo, it's like, yeah, but why have it here? Why should it not go somewhere else? So far I haven't come across that many biologists, but maybe I need to, when I interview Rem Koolhaas again, I have to ask him if he's working with any biologists. But I think that they can have maybe propositions, but ultimately you need to have the multidisciplinary approach for it to really be sufficiently robust, don't you? I mean, architecture is the generalist profession. There's only one other one that exists, and that's the medical profession. A biologist is not. Biologists can't do it themselves, can they?
Yes.
And let's say, with Enrique Gelli, working with the influence of Jeremy Rifkin, it's great to be influenced, but Jeremy Rifkin's not coming to Spain and proposing actual plans. Although, who is it? William McDonough, the cradle to cradle thinking. William McDonough was involved in Almere. But he's not a biologist. He's an architect who's a really advanced sustainability specialist. So I guess it's a little bit to do with getting the right specialists and experts in place, so you can make the best case to whoever your clients or prospective clients are. So you can compete with the opposition.
Any other question? Lucy, we have some cava for you.
Oh, great.